The ACC could soon lose Florida State if Clemson were to go with them. Can the ACC survive?
You are Locked On College Football, your daily podcast on all things college football. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Locked On College Football. I'm your host, Spencer McLaughlin. Thank you so much for making this your first listen or your first view every day. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. This is your number one source to stay up to date with the biggest stories in the greatest sport on planet Earth. Realignment, the transfer portal, coaching carousel, all that and more. We've got you covered. Today's episode is brought to you by Nissan. Are you the kind of driver that likes to push things a little further? Ever wonder what adventure could be around the next corner? Take the Nissan Rogue, Nissan Pathfinder, or Nissan Armada and go find your next big adventure. Check them all out today at nissanusa.com. Florida State, will BYU be the team to pop in the Big 12 and the next coaching vacancy in college football that could impact your team? That's all coming up on today's show. But we start with the Seminoles, who we haven't heard anything new at this point in time. We're still waiting to see what happens, but I just continue to think that they're going to find a way to wiggle their way out of the ACC. And if they do, are they going to move by themselves? No, I don't think so. Would Notre Dame finally join a conference? I don't know. They've been pretty resistant to that up until this point. The next logical team to go with Florida State would be Clemson, because if you're just making this sort of move because of football, well, the next biggest football brand in the ACC is Clemson. Once upon a time, it was Miami, but now it'd be Clemson. So let's say, just hypothetically, Florida State and Clemson get out of the Atlantic Coast Conference. They go to the Southeastern Conference, or the SEC as you know it, and you're left with what's left in the ACC, who added, by the way, 3 schools this offseason. That's not going to be enough to keep the ACC viable long term. Because if there is a demonstration that a move can be made if the financial will is present at a particular university, Florida State and Clemson leaving the ACC behind is akin to Texas and Oklahoma leaving the Big 12 behind. The difference is that the Big 12 does not suddenly clearly become the 4th worst conference amongst the Power 4. The ACC without Florida State and Clemson absolutely would. When I've talked about those two conferences before here on the show, which I know everyone in the Big 12 has agreed with me all the time on this particular front, the ACC is the stronger conference at the top. You've got more high-end potential teams and programs, but the depth is stronger in the Big 12, the middle of the conference, not the playoff contenders and the championship contenders. No, that's not a deeper lineup in the Big 12. But in the ACC, they're lacking in the middle there. So if you were to remove, I know Stanford, Cal, and SMU were really fun additions, but they're in the ACC because they had nowhere else to go, and the ACC said, "Sure, we'll take them. You're coming in for how little money? $6 million, $0 in media rights. Oh, I mean, we can't say no to that. We're a coastal conference now, a cross-coastal conference, if you will. If you take Florida State and Clemson out of the ACC, who's your flagship football program, which absolutely matters in this particular age? How do you prevent other schools from getting antsy and deciding we want to go elsewhere because we don't feel that this is a sufficiently competitive conference? The Pac-12 was teetering on being able to stay above that Mendoza line in terms of realignment and football relevance without USC and UCLA. I actually thought they could have done it, but financially, it was not going to work out. Well, even if financially it worked out, someone would look at the ACC and say, this is not a good enough conference anymore. Heck, we're looking at a 14-team playoff in which the ACC would get 2 auto bids. If you take Florida State and Clemson out, that probably gets reduced down to 1. Because you have a conference that would be headlined by Miami, I guess, and high floor, low ceiling North Carolina, Duke with Manny Diaz and Malik Murphy, the transfer from Texas. I mean, okay, NC State, Dave Doran, I talked about them on the show recently. I like what they've done. You don't have a big game. You don't have big brands. You don't have big television draws. You just have a bunch of, it's okay. Now, here's the question as it pertains to the ACC survival. If it were to if it comes to pass that Florida State and Clemson leave the conference, and if they were to go to the SEC and load it up even further, the logical conclusion is what I just discussed, that the ACC would not be strong enough, and schools like North Carolina or maybe Virginia would try to get into the Big Ten. Maybe Duke would throw their hat in the ring. Duke and North Carolina feel like Big Ten schools, at least academically and culturally. So that could maybe be a fit if they could pick them up on the cheap. Okay, they go look at Cal and Stanford as well, who are in the ACC. Yeah, they kind of feel like Big Ten schools, not with the amount of athletic support they always get, but certainly with their universities, they can fit in the Big Ten. If Oregon and Washington can fit in the Big Ten, and Washington's much different than Oregon, I'm aware, then yeah, Cal and Stanford could as well. But if those moves were to all take place, a lot of people in the comment section like to say, well, the Big 12 would go and scoop them up. Would they? Would they now? Because the Big 12, as we saw, has a clause in its contract with ESPN and Fox in its television deal to add schools at a full media rights share that are from other power conferences. Do you think that applies to every school in the ACC? Now, you're looking at the Arizona schools grabbing the Phoenix market. Utah and Colorado, right? Coach Prime's television value is pretty clear, plus Denver area and a growing market in Salt Lake City with Utah and such. And yeah, they were willing to pay a full share. But do you think ESPN is willing to pay a full share for everybody? Everybody that'd be in the ACC? Would there be a massive merger between the two? I don't know. So could the ACC survive by default because the other schools wouldn't be able to find a home? Yeah, it could. And then it would be relegated, I would think, to a status that is maybe slightly above the G5 still, and it probably would be given the programs that you would have left. But would it be treated as one of the Power Four, as it is with Florida State and Clemson in it? No, I do not believe so. Now, in a perfect world, if this comes to pass in the ACC, Mario Cristobal and his high-level recruiting starts to pay off, and they start to run the league and get things back going. That would be your best-case scenario. And then you'd keep everybody else around, and NC State could be a presence, and schools like Duke or North Carolina could be a steady presence at the top of the league. That is all very possible there. But if these two schools leave the ACC at any point in time, these discussions about an auto bid for the ACC, for multiple auto bids, I think that'll get reduced down to one. But a lot of people's instincts are to say, well, the Big 12 would just pick them up. Listen to all these schools: Georgia Tech, Virginia Tech, Boston College, Syracuse, Pitt, Virginia, Wake Forest. Maybe the Big 12 could pick up a couple. Maybe they'd be willing, ESPN would, to pay for a couple and expand its geographical reach of the Big 12 conference. And that's certainly something that Brett Yormark would and should be interested in. I think that's probably a good idea. But would they pay for all of them? Where would those schools end up? Would they be independents? Would they join the new premier Group of Five conference in college football that the Pac-12 is going to build by 2026 and beyond? Well, that might be the best option in play right there. But the takeaway here is this: there's been so much movement and so much shuffling in conference realignment that if Florida State and Clemson leave the ACC, if you just look at the conference, it shouldn't have enough to stay alive, but it could just barely hang on by a thread. Just barely. Let me know what you think in the YouTube comments. I'm sure many of you will. Do you know what's happening in Provo? They're trying to stand out. All these realignment moves. The grass is always greener. Join the big conference. It didn't go well last year for just about every team in the Big 12 that came from the G5 ranks. They all finished with a losing record. Every single one of them. Is that going to change for the BYU Cougars? Well, whether it is or not going to improve for BYU, you should still check out Nissan. Like, those two things, not particularly related. But if you're the kind of driver that likes to push things a little further and you ever wonder what adventure could be around the next corner, and that's just how you're thinking all the time, our friends at Nissan have a lineup of SUVs with the capabilities to take your adventure to the next level. Like the 2024 Nissan Rogue, for instance. Perfect for whatever you want to do. City drives, great escapes, it can do that. Class exclusive Google built-in is your always updating assistant to call on for almost anything. Gone are the days of connecting your phone, Google Assistant, Google Maps, and Google Play Store are built right into the 12.3-inch HD touchscreen infotainment system. The 2024 Rogue is the perfect midsize crossover for your next adventure. You can also check out the Nissan Pathfinder or the Nissan Armada, which bring you all sorts of great features, and they can both seat up to 8. Take the Nissan Rogue, Pathfinder, or Armada and go find your next big adventure. Shop at nissanusa.com. That's nissanusa.com. Is BYU going to pop in their second season in the Big 12 compared to the rest of their former G5 counterparts? Let's talk about that with Jake Hatch of Locked On BYU Cougars. It was a rough go of it for the newcomers in the expansion Big 12 last year, Jake, but is BYU going to be better than the 5-7 mark they hit last season?
Well, they're hoping so, because here's the thing. They started that season 5-2 in 2023 and then had a 5-game losing streak and missed out on a bowl game, and that does not sit right with anybody in Provo right now, but they have got to find a way to get to that 6-win mark. The only concern I've got is got a very, very daunting schedule looking at 2024.
Yeah, you look at the way their schedule shakes out, and you start with the Salukis of Southern Illinois at Lavelle Edwards Stadium in beautiful Provo, at SMU, at Wyoming. Look, I'm not saying it's a gauntlet of a non-conference slate, but I wouldn't consider it a cakewalk and 3 easy wins there. You got 1 easy win in 2 games you could very well lose. But what's this roster looking like for Kalani Sitake and the Cougars? How competitive is it compared to the rest of the rosters in the Big 12?
I think BYU's roster is actually in okay shape overall. They actually had their best recruiting class under Kalani Sitake to date in this past recruiting cycle, so that's a positive sign for them. But the problem is, with BYU, a lot of those guys are going to go on LDS missions, so you're not going to see them for maybe 2 years. So the biggest concern I think BYU's got roster-wise is who is their quarterback going to be? Because they got a 2-man race in spring camp right now between incumbent Jake Retzloff, and then they brought in former Baylor and USF quarterback Gary Bohannon, and they've said that those two are duking it out for the number 1 job. They've got a number of other guys in that room, but it looks like it's a 2-man race. Outside of that, though, BYU's got a pretty strong roster. It feels like they've done a good job kind of stocking it with depth. Now, depth was a big concern last year, especially along the offensive and defensive lines. They did a really, really concerted effort at looking at stocking those via recruiting this year. We're going to find out if the fruits of their labors will yield better depth, because if that is the case, I think BYU will hold up better in the Big 12 in year 2.
BYU is a very unique school. You have a lot of players, of course, that are going on missions, so they're recruited, but then they're not going to play for a couple of seasons. So what do you make of the wave of guys who maybe are returning from their missions to play for BYU this year? Who could some of the new impact players be?
We got 2 wide receivers in particular to keep an eye on. Dominique McKenzie, his brother Marcus was their special teams ace a year ago. They're twins out of St. George, Utah, down near where you're located, Spencer. And they are 2 of the best sprinters in the state of Utah's history in the last 5 or 6 years. So keep an eye on Dominique McKenzie. And then another wide receiver, Cody Hagan, out of Corner Canyon High School, one of the powerhouse high school programs here in the state of Utah. He was a 4-star prospect. BYU has been super excited to finally get him on the field in Provo. Provided both of them return from their missions and are in relatively good shape, you can see those 2 really stepping in right away. And then a running back that I think is going to add some depth behind LJ Martin, who's expected to be BYU's number 1 running back, is a kid by the name of Pokai Haunga. He is from Provo, played at Timpview High School just up the street from BYU. Similar to Hagan, has not stepped foot on BYU's campus yet after serving that mission, but those 3 players in particular are ones to keep an eye on. And then along the offensive front, a guy by the name of Joe Brown, maybe the most generic name in all of college football. But BYU's very excited to have this kid. He's from Lone Peak High School, another local product here in the state of Utah. But they think that he has a potential to start potentially as early as game 1 this fall. He's that talented of an O-lineman.
I heard a rumor that when they were figuring out how to identify unnamed dead bodies in crime scene investigations, the finalists were John Doe and Joe Brown. It was a running gun battle between the 2, but that's a name to keep an eye on there in Provo this year. Receivers are only as good as the quarterback that can get them the ball, right? And look, from the outside, you look at Gary Bohannon, and it's not blowing you away. It's not a name you bring in that gets you a really excited. Like this feels like a true quarterback battle, right?
Well, and that's what it is. It is a QB battle. Absolutely. Jake Retzloff played 4 games last year after Keaton Slovis got injured. And let's just be honest, he was not all that impressive in terms of his overall showings and stats. They did not scream that he is the future star for BYU at the quarterback position. So they went to the portal trying to find somebody to come in and compete with them. And as it worked out, BYU ultimately landed with Gary Bohannon coming in. Now, he obviously has a resume from 2021, having led Baylor to that Sugar Bowl win and that Big 12 title, but since then he's had numerous injuries, most notably a shoulder injury that had knocked him out for the past 18 months. Aaron Roderick, their offensive coordinator, said that he and a host of other coaches traveled to Tampa, Florida not all that long ago to watch Gary throw the football. Came away, they felt impressed enough that they felt like they could bring him in and he could compete for the starting job. Will he ultimately land it? TBD, but he is 3 seasons removed from his best season of his college career, and really his only season of note in his college career. So you're betting a lot on 2 guys who are relatively unproven for BYU at the quarterback position.
What do these 2 guys bring to the table? What are their skill sets, and how does that fit into what BYU wants to do offensively?
They're both guys who like to throw the ball down the field. Now, if you know anything about Aaron Roderick's offense, for those of you who do not know, he likes to run the ball and then set up the deep play action passes. He likes to attack down the field. We're talking 20, 30-yard bombs down the field. And that is one thing both of those guys have proven at points during their careers, whether it's Jake Retzloff at the junior college level or Gary Bohannon at Baylor, is they have a nice touch on their deep ball. Now, you obviously have to have the intermediate and short passing games as well. And those are 2 areas I think those 2 guys have struggled. The one thing that they also bring is the fact that they're dual threat quarterbacks. They can run the football. BYU's offense operates best when their quarterback is a run threat. Anybody who watched BYU last year saw Keaton Slovis be more of a statue in the backfield there, and it really hampered BYU's offensive output without that run threat from the quarterback position. I'm not saying they have to be a guy who's going to run for 1,000 yards in a season as a quarterback, but that run threat alone is a big, big key for BYU's offense to have success, and both of these guys offer that to this team.
Cincinnati and BYU have been much more quiet amongst the 4 newer Big 12 teams from a season ago. Of course, you've got the 4 newcomers with Arizona, Arizona State, Utah, and Colorado this year. But I think BYU is going to naturally, and I think fairly, be compared as, a coaching staff and as a program to the teams that they came into the Big 12 with: Cincinnati, Houston, and UCF. And Houston's hired Willie Fritz, and UCF has got Gus Malzahn, and they've brought in KJ Jefferson from Arkansas to be the quarterback there. How does BYU emerge, at least just amongst those 4, almost thinking about it as, a smaller conference, because no one's expecting these teams at this point in time to compete for a Big 12 championship? How does BYU emerge out of the pack and be the most successful to at least get to a bowl game?
They need to get back to doing what they did with Zach Wilson and Jaron Hall under center. And what that is having a hard-nosed running game. When Jeff Grimes was their offensive coordinator and O-line coach at BYU before departing for Baylor, he always talked about his offensive line needs to be the quote-unquote tip of the spear. And what he meant by that is that O-line has to be the best unit on the field for BYU. They got to be able to own the line of scrimmage, opening holes for BYU's running backs, and obviously giving protection to BYU's quarterbacks, get the ball down the field. Last year, frankly, the offensive line was abysmal. It was just not good enough for BYU standards, and they suffered as a result. The running game was absolutely putrid for most of the season. The passing game was really kind of what BYU relied upon, but they need to get back to running the football. They got to get back to being that physical team that a lot of people associate BYU's brand under Kalani Sitake with. They were anything but last year. They can get back to more of that this year, and so far through spring camp, they've really kind of honed in on wanting to be a far more physical team. If they can do that, they can become a quote-unquote sledgehammer type team. That could go a long way to helping BYU have success this fall.
Their schedule looks something like this: Southern Illinois, then at SMU and at Wyoming. Big 12 play begins and runs for the next 9 games. You start with Kansas State, which is a rude introduction to Big 12 conference play. They're one of the favorites in the league this year. They go at Baylor the following week, couple of staffs that are in similar spots where they had down seasons in 2023 compared to what they perhaps would have liked. And certainly Baylor, I think, is probably under a little bit more pressure since they're not undergoing a transition there. Then you host Arizona, you host Oklahoma State, always good, at UCF, at Utah, host Kansas, at ASU, and then hosting Houston. The middle stretch there is just brutal. Where do you feel like the win total should be for this BYU team?
Well, honestly, I think the goal for BYU is 6 wins. Find a way to pick off your non-conference games. You win those 3, and then you have that Houston game, I think, with Willie Fritz. He will be late on into his first year, but still very much a transition going on at Houston. So that feels like that's essentially a 4th win. Outside of those 4, can you pick off 2 more wins at some point? Can you maybe get somebody coming off a big win and you can sneak a win that way? Can you go to UCF and get a big win? Can you stun Utah on their home field? You got to find a way to win 2 games outside of those 4 that I already mentioned. And that's the big goal for BYU is they want to get back to the postseason. They don't want to go bowlless for a second straight year. This is a program since the turn of the century, so going back to 2000, BYU's only missed out on the postseason 5 times, and 2 of those seasons are in the past 18 years. They had 3 in a row from 02 to 04. So they do not miss out on the bowl season, and they don't want to miss out on for a second straight year. So I think, frankly, the goal is find a way to get to 6 wins.
No matter which college football team you are a fan of, you need to be paying attention to Vanderbilt. I'll tell you why next. For now, we'll get my guy Jake Hatch out of here. Locked On BYU Cougars. Go check him out, Jake. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Before we get to chatting about the Commodores, which you definitely need to hear, no matter what team you're a fan of, you also need to hear about FanDuel. No matter which team you are a fan of, you can get buckets with your first bet on FanDuel. That's America's #1 sportsbook. Not 2, not 3, not 4, #1. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 if your bet wins. I'm a Portland native. I got free advice for you here. Just go bet money line against the Blazers. It's probably going to hit. $150 if your bet wins. You can bet all your favorite NBA players and teams with quick bets, live same-game parlays, exclusive props, and more. You can also bet everything to your heart's desire with regards to college football, win totals, conference championship odds, national championship odds, Heisman winners, anything you want, it's all over there. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and shoot your shot. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon, FanDuel official sportsbook partner of the NBA. You need to hear about Vanderbilt if you're a fan of any major college football program. Why? Because on every coaching staff, just about every coaching staff, you have 3 key positions: your head coach, and then your offensive and defensive coordinator. I'm not breaking any news there by explaining that to everyone. I'm just laying the groundwork for the argument that I am making here, which is that the Vanderbilt coaching job may very well come available after this season because their head coach, Clark Lea, has been there for 3 years. It hasn't gone great. 2 wins with 0 in the SEC, 5 wins with 2 in the SEC. They almost made a bowl game in 2022, and then they regressed and had an identical 2021 season. 2-10 overall, 0-8 in conference play. They've been the doormat of the SEC for a long time. They haven't made a bowl game since 2018. They have never put together a double-digit win season. The fact that James Franklin got them to back-to-back 9-win seasons and had them ending ranked inside the top 25 is nothing short of a coaching miracle, is how it appears, because the coaches who have succeeded him, it hasn't gone very well. Derek Mason never won more than 6 games. Did make 2 bowl game appearances, did not win either of them. And Clark Lea was a defensive coordinator at Notre Dame, and he's trying. He's working, but boy, it's a tough job. It's a really, really tough job. So why am I talking about it? Because every single year, coordinators go take big-time jobs. They look at an opportunity and say, I want the chance to be a head coach. And do you know how many coordinators in college football would leap at the opportunity to be the head coach of the Vanderbilt Commodores? Probably the worst Power 4 job in all of college football. Perhaps the most challenging at the very least. But coordinators are going to have their eyes get wide at the opportunity to say, I am the head coach of this program. And even in the new look SEC with Texas and Oklahoma, it's an even stronger, the historically best conference in the country that has 16 straight #1 recruiting classes, that wins the overwhelming majority of national championships in the modern era. That conference has gotten even better, and yet you are still going to have somebody. Now, if you are a fan of a particular college football team, listening to or watching the show, listening to me talk about this, and you are wondering, well, wait, my offensive coordinator has been here for a couple of years. Well, wait, my defensive coordinator is seen as a young rising star, or we have this key assistant over here who's maybe a defensive assistant, or maybe he's a quarterback's coach or somebody like that. Or we have this dynamite recruiter. Would he really leave to go take the Vanderbilt job? Yeah, because of what James Franklin did. James Franklin went there and had back-to-back 9-win seasons, as I mentioned. So you can't look, even in the modern era of college football. It's different than it was back then with NIL and the portal. I'll grant you that. But Vanderbilt's resources are still stronger because they're in the SEC. Their facilities and their market and their brand and everything about it is still stronger than some of the head coaching opportunities that you could lose a coordinator to. Will you have a head coach make a lateral move? No, of course not. The only lateral move that gets made from Vanderbilt is going from one power team to another, which is exactly what James Franklin did. But Clark Lea has to win games this year, or he might be out the door. I mean, this is going into year number 4. Can't say he hasn't been given time. Can't say he didn't show a lot of potential last season. I mean, by all accounts, I don't know how many Vanderbilt fans we got out there listening to or watching the show. You were probably really disappointed with the 2023 season. They were one game shy. They beat Florida in 2022. That's a crazy sentence. That's a crazy sentence. Absolutely bonkers. And yet it happened. Can you imagine? Go back to 2007 and say, hey, one day this football program right here is going to have a documentary made about it 2 years after they lose, year and a half, maybe year, after they lose a game to Vanderbilt. Crazy. A lot can change over the course of time. The question becomes for Clark Lea and the Commodores, what's the standard? Like, is there a standard? Does he have to get to a bowl game? Vanderbilt's win total is 2.5. Yee. They've had some key players go out via the transfer portal and find other Power 4 homes. I mean, Vanderbilt in many ways, it's like the Oakland A's to the Yankees. They're a feeder program for other big-time schools to come and take their best players in the transfer portal. So here's Vanderbilt's schedule this year. They host Virginia Tech to begin. Well, Virginia Tech has not been what it's capable of being as a football program. So to say that I'm more than a little interested in that game would be an understatement, because that game is not being played on the East Coast. It's being played in the Eastern time zone, but it's being played in Nashville. And then Vanderbilt plays Alcorn State. Then they play at Georgia State. Then they go at Missouri. I don't think Eli Drinkowitz is going to lose that game. They host Alabama. I'm sorry, but Kalen DeBoer is going to win that football game. At Kentucky. Does Mark Stoops seem like he's in a position to lose that game right there? Then they come back home and host Ball State. That's where the winnable games end. And I'm not saying the previous 3 games were winnable against Kentucky, Alabama, and Missouri. There'd be a massive upset in there if they were to find a victory. I just wonder if Vanderbilt can win 2 SEC games. Heck, I wonder if they can win 1. Because after they get the break against Ball State, they come back home and play Texas, where they will be at a significant roster disadvantage. Then they go at Auburn. Now, if you're hosting Auburn, maybe. Auburn's played down to their level of competition before in the last couple seasons. But at Auburn, good luck at Jordan-Hare Stadium. They come back home, host South Carolina. Shane Beamer and company, boy, you better win that football game or questions could be raised before they, Vanderbilt that is, get a bye. Then they go at LSU, come back home, and host Tennessee. So their win total sitting there at 2.5. I don't think athletic departments are in tune with what Vegas is setting their win total at. At least it's not a part of their messaging, their media, their philosophy, or anything like that. Now, Vanderbilt, as we know, is a baseball school. Here's where my question comes. What is the standard for success? What's the barometer of no, we don't need to make a new hire. We don't need to open up the coaching carousel. Because when you go 0-8 in SEC play, what if they come out of the gates, and with that schedule, as they very well could, what if they start 0-5 in league play? Remember, Missouri, then Alabama, at Kentucky, Texas at Auburn. Their most winnable SEC game, in my view, would be South Carolina. That doesn't take place until November 9th. So could you have a midseason opening? Would they wait until the end of the year and see how many wins they could get? But how many wins do you need? How many wins do you need to avoid being the next coaching carousel position to come available? And you know what? I don't have my finger on the pulse of what that number is. 5 wins? Because that's what he did in his second year and was, given some semblance of hope. They were playing in the last week of the regular season to make a bowl game. Do you have to make a bowl game? Is that what the expectation is? I don't know. But if you're a college football fan of a major program, this isn't a job. This is a school that you need to keep your eye on. Because if Vanderbilt has a stumble against, say, Georgia State on the road, they've got a new head coach, by the way, somebody from Kirby Smart's staff. That coaching tree typically goes decently well. If they get off to a rough start, if they lose that game, you could see that coaching vacancy come open, and then everyone will just be looking around going, wait, is it going to be my coordinator? No, it's going to be your coordinator. Wait, my coordinator's on the short list? You're not going to have head coaches at the Power 4 go to Vanderbilt, but you'll have coordinators be on the move, so just keep your eye out for them. Appreciate everyone listening. I'll see you next time, and until then, hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.